is Canada after this last lost anti-development Liberal decade? Only 11 years ago, Canada became internationally recognized as home to the richest and biggest middle class in the world, with more children lifted out of poverty than ever before. And heading into 2015, the budget was under control with $1 billion surplus, and Canada's economy was the strongest in the G7, the last in and the first out of the great global recession. Today, Canada's economy has fallen behind our allies. Productivity lags. Workers can't make ends meet and wonder whose job will be gone next. Canada's natural wealth sits idle in the ground and offshore. Investment heads south and to other countries. Families and people with no one else to count on but themselves fall further behind. Young people lose hope for their futures, whether they will ever be able to afford a home, build up a nest egg, or actually capture their big dreams. Communities lose opportunities and dwindle. Businesses close due to excessive red tape, taxes, costs, constant uncertainty, and have to reduce their charitable and community contributions. Violence, crime, mental distress, and suicides, especially among rural men, are on a steady rise. Killing energy projects doesn't just cut jobs or cost jobs, it costs communities. It takes away critical revenue to build roads and bridges, critical support for social programs, to build arenas, support healthcare like the long-term partnerships with the Lloydminster and Bonnyville Regional Health Foundations and energy companies, and to build schools and universities. Today, Canada works for the super rich, the well-established, the elites, the well-connected, the big companies of all kinds, and mostly foreign founded and multinationals. But it doesn't work for the Canadian people who do the work, who take big risks and build big projects, for individual entrepreneurs, small business owners, innovators, for the workers and contractors who fuel, feed, and power this country, for our Canadian people. That's the Liberal legacy. And the cost to Canadians is real, and it's staggering. So today we MPs find ourselves in an odd position. This very same government that inflicted the last decade of anti-energy, anti-private sector death by delay and uncertainty on natural resources workers and businesses in every corner of Canada, that harmed all the secondary and tertiary sectors that depend on it everywhere, allies sent away in dire need of Canadian resources and divided our country, pit Canadians, provinces, businesses, and sectors against each other, suddenly claims to want big natural resources and infrastructure projects to get built in Canada. So they brought in C5 with all kinds of big promises, but at its heart, what C5 really is a glaring admission that everything the Liberals have done for the last 10 years has made Canada a place where their red tape and constant changing goalposts get to no, and nothing can get built efficiently or affordably. So the real question is, will the Liberals' Bill C5 really clean up the colossal mess the Liberals themselves have made? No. Where are the projects held back by this lost Liberal decade? Where are the investments that would have created prosperity for every single Canadian? Where are the thousands of well-paid jobs for Canadians everywhere, and especially in rural, remote, northern, Atlantic, and Indigenous communities that need them most? Where are the revenues for all three levels of government to fund public services and programs, build public infrastructure, and support communities? Where has all that gone? And how much are we talking about here anyway? Well, Canada has lost $670 billion in cancelled oil, gas, LNG, and pipeline projects alone since 2015, due completely to these Liberals' anti-energy, anti-development messages, policies, and laws. On Wednesday night in Committee of the Whole, the Minister and I discussed C5 a bit. I suggested an obvious, immediate first step if they really want to get Canadians working and building, to strengthen Canada's economy and sovereignty that wouldn't require weeks and months of delay, meeting after meeting, and press conference promises with very few details. The minister said I brought up hypothetical projects and refused to say whether they met his factors for projects in the national interest, which the Liberals themselves will decide. Now, that was alarming in itself, since the projects I mentioned are real projects with real proponents that offer real jobs, with powerful paychecks for Canadians and long-term tax revenue for all three levels of government, real businesses paying real money and losing real time trying to get to build their big projects. The problem is, they're stuck. They're stuck in one form of federal regulation or red tape right now. So the immediate solution is blindingly obvious without all this extra rigmarole, uncertainty, and time delays. What was extra weird about the minister's evasion is that of the 5 vague factors they've outlined for C5 that they will use to decide themselves what's in the national interest are 2 of these factors: that projects must bring economic or other benefits to Canada and must have a high likelihood of successful execution. Well, clearly the top priority action then to fast track efficiently should be all the projects and proponents stuck in red tape right now by these Liberals' own conditions. Where is the Crawford nickel cobalt mine project near Timmins, Ontario? Proposed in 2020, but stuck in the regulatory mess the Liberals created. Where is the Troilus gold and copper mining project in Quebec? Stuck in the regulator since 2023. Where is the Rook I uranium mine and Denison uranium mine projects in northern Saskatchewan? Proposed in 2019, both still stuck. Where is the Bruce C nuclear project planned for Ontario? Stuck in double layers of regulatory review. No wonder Canada ranks dead last in the G7 for development. But these projects are not only lost in red tape, they seem to be also lost completely from consideration by the minister, since he was so adamant on Tuesday night that they didn't exist. 5 projects, 5 chances to grow Canada's economy, 5 chances to lead the world in energy, in innovation, in responsible resource development, and Indigenous opportunities. But of course, it's not only those 5 projects. In fact, there are dozens of major energy, nuclear, critical mineral, and Indigenous-backed resource road proposals that are stuck in limbo right now at the federal level. These projects aren't theoretical. They have names, investors, and local support. They've involved years of engineering, technical, environmental, and consultation work, risk, and investment. The missing piece is a federal government with the will to fast-track the assessments through the regulatory maze they themselves created and approve them efficiently, and back proponents once they approve them, so proponents can actually build on their time and on their dime. Because in C69, as is also the case in C5, Cabinet is the final decision maker with all the power. And currently, both officials and ministers already have significant sweeping powers to start, stop, restart, extend, delay, suspend, change the rules, and start all over again as many times as they want. No wonder things can't get built. So they've also got the power to fast track them right now. Instead, they ignore all those real and ready projects, proponents, and people, and have brought in a short-term workaround of their own bad policies and laws, which is C5. The Liberals talk about emissions reductions, impose electric vehicle mandates, and want so-called green growth, but stall the very projects needed to make all that happen. You can't build electric vehicles without nickel, lithium, and cobalt currently dominated by China. You can't power a reliable, affordable, modern grid without uranium and natural gas. You can't reduce emissions and build new technology without the innovation, jobs, and revenues that come from responsible Canadian resource development, mostly from traditional oil and gas and pipeline companies. Alberta is an example. By 2023, Alberta oil sands reduced emissions intensity while growing production by 96% and leads the country in alternative energy development too, as in fact we always have. According to the federal government's National Inventory Report in 2025, Alberta had the largest absolute reduction of emissions of any Canadian province between 2023 and between 2022 and 2023. Now that's the truth the Liberals won't tell Canadians, isn't it? Albertans cut emissions not by shutting down, but by showing up and building through free enterprise, innovation, and technology, getting better emissions reduction results, real emissions reduction results, without killing jobs or driving away investment. Yet this Liberal government still treats Alberta and every province that develops resources, those of us in the so-called ROC, the rest of Canada, that politicians in Ottawa usually ignore, as problems, not solutions. They punish the most responsible energy producers in the world and give a free pass to foreign polluters. They celebrate emissions reductions in Canada when they come from lockdowns, lost jobs, and bankrupt businesses. Canadians can't afford essentials because the government drives up costs and imposes unrealistic targets on power and fuel. And it's worse when the facts don't fit their narrative. When it turns out Alberta reduces emissions the most, the Liberals stay silent. When LNG could displace coal for growing energy demand in Asia, India, and Africa from BC, or help secure European energy needs and cut dependence on Russia, the Liberals turn allies away. When Western provinces want to build major projects or Northerners want to mine and drill offshore, the Liberals deny, ban, and delay. When Atlantic Canadians want to drill offshore, ship LNG to Europe, or have a pipeline bring Western oil to Eastern refineries so future generations of Atlantic Canadians can stay home with jobs and abundant opportunities, the Liberals interfere and then look away. And let me pause here to tell you how important that issue is to me, because the fact is that Atlantic Canadians and Albertans are inextricably linked. We've helped build each other's province to the best interests of all Canadians, and I say that as a first-generation born and raised Albertan, as the daughter of a Nova Scotian and a Newfoundlander. When the Liberals spent years talking about reconciliation, yet delay, risk, or kill pipelines, roads, mining projects, and LNG opportunities that so many Indigenous leaders, elders, youth, entrepreneurs, and workers spent years negotiating with businesses to get jobs, to get their own source revenue, and to do environmental oversight in a good way. The Liberals claim to support First Nations, but deny them of the opportunity to own, to build, to partner, and to profit. It's not reconciliation when Ottawa decides who can build and who must wait. It's not partnership when one side always says no. And it's not respect when Indigenous voices are ignored because they want to make their own development decisions and exercise their rights and title.
Hear, hear.
This bill that we debate today proves what Conservatives have said all along. The Liberals' anti-development agenda kills Canadian jobs, kills Canadian investment, weakens Canada's security, unity, and sovereignty, and has made our country a risky place where nothing can get built and where uncompetitive, pancaked, and incoherent taxes, laws, and policies, uncertainty, and constant changing goalposts deter big projects from our own country. Canadians deserve a plan based on facts and results, not vague statements and delay from the same government that caused the problems they suddenly now claim to want to fix. The consequences of the Liberals' anti-development decade are growing poverty, not prosperity, and fractured national unity. They pit Canadians against each other and attack Albertan businesses in particular with constant misinformation and myths. The reality is, when Alberta builds and grows, so does Canada. When Alberta is strong, so is Canada. And Albertans have been there all along with our friends from Saskatchewan and from Atlantic Canada.
Hear, hear.
We've just been asking the Liberals to help get the country's top export from the industry that is still the biggest investor in Canada's declining economy by far, whether the anti-energy zealots like it or not, to more markets globally so Canada isn't dependent on the United States. But 10 years later, 10 years of this last anti-development Liberal decade, Canada faces economic, security, and sovereignty threats from our closest ally, the world's biggest economy, our biggest customer, and now, because the Liberals held Canada back every step of the way, our biggest competitor. And Canadians can't afford essentials because the government drove up the costs of power and fuel for everyone. Now, make no mistake, it didn't have to be this way. But with all due respect, by which I mean almost none, the time to, quote, build Canada, to make our country self-reliant, secure, united, and strong was the last decade. And the answer has always been to unleash Canada's natural resources and increase production and export customers, as Conservatives, and only Conservatives, have consistently and unequivocally advocated the entire time. This was never actually an even-sided theoretical or philosophical debate. It has always been simply the fiscal and economic reality of our country. Canadians deserve a government that backs them, not a government that blocks them, not a government that pees down our leg and tells us it's raining. C5 is breadcrumbs and baby steps, not a real breakthrough of Liberal-inflicted barriers on Canada. Our country needs real change and long-term concrete certainty for the private sector and for Canadian workers to make us autonomous, resilient, and secure, like the Liberals say they want to do now, even though they've been in charge around here for the last 10 years. So what would that actually look like? Well, it would mean fixing the fundamentals. Repeal the failed no new pipelines, never build anything, Bill C-69, rife with uncertainty, no concrete timelines despite Liberal claims, arbitrary and unrelated conditions, political interference, and jurisdictional overreach that the provinces and territories, businesses, and Indigenous groups all oppose or want to overhaul, and the Supreme Court declared unconstitutional for all the reasons, every single reason, in fact, that Conservatives, and it happened to be me, warned about during the debates. But Liberals ignored this entire Conservative team, all the premiers, all the territorial leaders, the private sector, and the Senate, and rammed it through anyway. They should repeal the shipping ban, Bill C-48, that blocks dedicated export routes for Canada's much-needed energy to countries with actually emerging markets who need Canadian energy and technology in Asia, like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines, and to European allies like Germany, Latvia, Ukraine, Greece, and Poland, and the geopolitical security aspects of this issue obviously cannot be overstated. That ban signals that shipping may be blocked by the government off any coast, just like their offshore unilateral drilling bans and anti-development zones on land and in water, but it stays. And clearly the Liberals are A-OK with Canada's allies and other countries getting energy they'll continue to want long into the future from the US or from foreign regimes like Venezuela, Libya, Iran, and Saudi Arabia over Canada, which with much lower environmental, labor, and safety standards, where the benefits usually only go to a wealthy few. Repeal the Canadian oil and gas cap that will cut Canadian energy production by 5%, will kill over 50,000 jobs and over $20 billion from Canada's GDP. That's self-inflicted sabotage that no other country in the world is doing to itself, and totally nonsensical for what is actually a radical anti-energy government suddenly plagiarizing, like someone's thesis, the former Conservative government's vision for Canada as an energy superpower. While the minister and his Liberal buddies laughed when I asked questions about job losses, Canadians stress, wondering where their next paycheck will come from. In 2021, TD Economics projected Canadian oil and gas jobs, up to 75% of them, could disappear by 2050.
Wow.
The Liberals call it a transition. For Canada, it's devastation. So they should repeal the globalist top-down economic restructuring just transition plan in Bill C-50 that the Liberals already know will threaten the livelihoods of 2.7 million Canadians and cause labour disruptions, that's bureaucraties for job losses, for 642,000 workers in the transportation sector, almost 300,000 agriculture workers, 202,000 energy workers, and get this, 193,000 in Canada's important manufacturing sector, maybe more important than ever before, given this world becoming more dangerous and the global threats that Canada faces, because this Liberal government has failed us. But the truth is, the future doesn't look brighter with this same government pretending to be a new one. TD reports the unemployment rate in Canada has risen to its highest rate since 2016, outside of COVID, to 7%, and 100,000 jobs to be lost by the third quarter of this year. The job outlook for students is even worse, with a 20% unemployment rate. That's the highest since the 2008 recession. In fact, Canadian manufacturing has lost 55,000 jobs in only a period of 4 months. This is not getting Canada on track. It's the continued track record of this same Liberal government. And you know what they say about lipstick on a pig. It wasn't always this way. Under the former Conservative government, Canada ranked 4th for ease of doing business of all countries in the world. But by 2020, with these Liberals, Canada had fallen to 24th, behind Georgia and Thailand. Today, Canada ranks near the bottom globally for construction permits, for property registration, securing electricity, and cross-border trade. In fact, Canada is ranked second worst in the OECD for construction permit timelines because of these Liberals. The Liberals' blocked projects, hiked taxes, and doubled debt has made Canada 30% less productive than the US today. And since 2015, 5.6 trillion, yeah, that's what I said, trillion, has left Canada for the US. That's not a coincidence. That's a Liberal consequence. The trend of Canadian investment up in the US and US investment down in Canada is a historic anomaly caused squarely and for the first time ever by the Liberals' damaging economic and energy policies. Just last week, Stats Can reported a more than 5% decline in forestry, fishing, mining, quarrying, oil and gas since last spring. Declines in primary and resource-producing sectors impact everything else. Ontarians now face the worst unemployment outside COVID since 2013. In April alone, Ontario lost 33,000 manufacturing jobs, tens of thousands of real people who lost their jobs, while the Liberals patronize and laugh at opposition MPs fighting for those workers. It's a travesty that it's taken global instability, external threats, growing conflicts, and a cost of living crisis the Liberals created for them to even appear to take notice. Canadians now know, without a doubt, that energy security means food, job, and national security for Canada. Last year, the energy sector contributed 7.7% of GDP, or $208.8 billion to Canada. 446,600 Canadian workers, including 10,800 Indigenous people, relied on natural resources. My point here is that none of this is accidental or externally inflicted on Canada. It's the direct result of domestic anti-development laws and policies. Canada's top global energy and resource competitors have ramped up their production of all kinds in the same time period with much lower standards than Canada. So we arrive at Bill C-5. The Prime Minister, who advised the last one for half a decade and is well known for his global advocacy to keep resources in the ground, hasn't actually explained whether he's had some kind of major philosophical metamorphosis and transformation and an awakening from all his previous values and views. But nevertheless has met with premiers and businesses and suddenly claims to want to do what conservatives have been urging the gatekeeping, road-blocking radical liberals to do the entire time, which is to build, build, build.
Hear, hear.
Except there are a lot of questions. So let's start at the beginning. As of right now, the Liberals say 5 factors will be considered to determine whether projects are in the national interest. Vote 2. Strengthen Canada's autonomy, resilience, and security. Provide economic or other, whatever that means, benefits to Canada. Have a high likelihood of successful execution. Advance the interests of Indigenous people. And contribute to clean growth and to Canada's objectives with respect to climate change. Now, it's worth a pause here to point out that most Canadians would likely be shocked that these factors aren't already part of regulatory and cabinet decision-making and may rightly wonder what the heck the government has been thinking about for the past decade. But also, it's worth noting that these concepts are broad enough that any interpretation or any argument could be made about each factor either way for any project, which is, of course, automatically and inherently uncertain and wide open to manipulation and ideological or politically connected decision-making. So much for objective, technology and sector agnostic, predictable, clear, certain, and evidence-based decision-making in Canada. And as of right now, there is no public list of projects. Now, the Prime Minister says he's getting lists from provinces, and some premiers have said what their asks are, yet the Minister claims there is no list, and that will happen after Bill C-5 is law. The Minister specifically said on Wednesday, I meant Wednesday earlier, not Tuesday, that, quote, when the projects are designated, they will be made public. Well, do the projects drive the legislation, or does the legislation drive the projects? Do they have a list from premiers, or do they not? Well, nobody knows because of mixed messages and misleading answers. But what's clear is the whole thing is a politically driven and determined process, which is actually already exactly what the Liberals have been doing for the last decade. That's the opposite of clarity and certainty.
Order. I have to interrupt the member as it is 11 o'clock. We will now proceed to statement by his members and the